The crystalline chamber stretched high above the gathered delegates, its walls catching and reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. Jae-won Kim stood at the center of the council floor, his gray hair and lined face showing every one of his 70 years. Behind him, Hyori Park held a datapad with steady hands, though her heart raced with barely controlled anger. 200 years. For 200 years, humanity had waited for this moment. 2 centuries of playing by the council's rules, of accepting their limitations, of proving themselves worthy. And now, standing before the assembled powers of the galaxy, Jae-won knew the answer before he even asked the question. Counselor Thexvar rose from his seat, his reptilian features twisted into something that might have been amusement. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights as he addressed the human delegation with barely concealed contempt. Ambassador Kim, the Council has reviewed your petition for full membership. After extensive deliberation, we must decline your request. Thexvar's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and final. Jae-won had expected this, but the words still cut deep. He remained silent, waiting for the justification he knew would follow. The Council always provided justifications. It made them feel civilized. Humanity has repeatedly violated trade protocols, Thexvar continued, gesturing to a floating display that showed fabricated evidence. Your species has reverse-engineered technology without permission. You have exceeded agreed population limits on colony worlds. You have shown a disturbing tendency toward aggressive expansion and resource exploitation. Hyori's fingers tightened on the datapad. Every accusation was a lie or a distortion. The trade protocols humanity had supposedly violated were deliberately designed to be impossible to follow. The technology they had reverse-engineered was based on their own research that predated Council contact. The population limits were arbitrary numbers that no other species had to follow. Other counselors nodded in agreement. Miradesh, the insectoid representative, remained motionless as always, her compound eyes revealing nothing. Ambassador Velcros, the avian delegate, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing in humanity's defense. Jae-won waited until the chamber fell silent. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of 2 centuries of hope and disappointment settling on his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. We came to the Council seeking partnership. We offered our knowledge, our labor, our friendship. For 200 years, we have followed every rule you set before us, no matter how arbitrary. We have accepted every limitation, every insult, every dismissal. He paused, looking directly at Thexvar. We leave seeking nothing from you. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Thexvar's eyes narrowed. You leave? Humanity does not have permission to abandon Council space. Jae-won allowed himself a small, bitter smile. We are not asking for permission to abandon Council space, Counselor. We are informing you that humanity is recalling all embassies, all trade missions, all research stations, and all diplomatic personnel. Effective immediately, we are withdrawing from all Council territories and returning to our own systems. This is unacceptable, Thexvar hissed, rising from his seat. You cannot simply leave. There are treaties, agreements, obligations, all of which we have fulfilled to the letter, Hyori interjected, her voice sharp. She stepped forward, holding up the datapad. Every debt paid, every contract completed, every obligation met. We owe the Council nothing. Thexvar's anger was palpable, but beneath it, Jae-won could see something else. Relief. The Council wanted humanity gone. They had always wanted humanity gone. Humans were too unpredictable, too innovative, too difficult to control. This withdrawal was exactly what the Council desired, even if they would never admit it publicly. The Council grants permission for humanity's departure, Thexvar finally said, settling back into his seat. We wish you well in your isolated endeavors. Jae-won bowed slightly, a gesture of courtesy that cost him nothing. The Council's permission is noted but unnecessary. Humanity leaves of its own accord. He turned to leave, Hyori following close behind. As they walked toward the chamber exit, Velcros called out, Ambassador Kim, is there nothing that would change your mind? No compromise we could reach? Jae-won stopped but did not turn around. For 200 years, Counselor, we sought compromise. We were told we were not ready. We were told we needed more time. We were told we needed to prove ourselves worthy. He glanced back over his shoulder. We have realized that no amount of time or proof would ever be enough. The Council did not want partners. It wanted subordinates. Humanity will not subordinate itself to anyone. The walk through the council station felt longer than usual. Aliens of dozens of species watched the human delegation pass, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed satisfaction. Word of humanity's withdrawal had already spread through the gossip networks that connected the station. At the docking bay, a small fleet of human vessels waited. They were modest ships by council standards, functional and undecorated. But each one represented years of human ingenuity, built with resources scraped together under the council's restrictive economic policies. Captain Da-Un Lee stood at the airlock of the lead vessel, saluting as Jae-won approached. "All personnel are aboard, Ambassador. All equipment has been removed from council facilities. We're ready to depart on your order." Jae-won nodded, stepping into the airlock. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see the massive council station, its crystalline spires reaching out like grasping fingers. He had spent half his life in that place fighting for recognition that would never come. "Give the order, Captain. Take us home." The human fleet departed in perfect formation, engines firing in synchronized precision. No fanfare, no threats, no dramatic gestures. Just a quiet, dignified exit from a relationship that had been broken from the start. On the bridge of the lead ship, Hyo-ri watched the council station shrink in the distance. "Do you think they'll regret this?" Jae-won was silent for a long moment, staring at the stars ahead. "Perhaps. But by the time they do, it will be too late. We offered them everything. They chose nothing." He turned away from the viewport. "Now we build our own future. Without them." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving council space behind. In the crystalline chamber, the councilors had already moved on to other business, dismissing humanity's departure as a minor inconvenience. They would remember this day differently in the years to come, but for now they felt only relief. The humans were gone. The problem had solved itself. The council was satisfied. They had no idea what they had just lost. 50 years had passed since the humans left, and Councillor Thexavar barely remembered their names anymore. The council had continued its work without interruption, governing the galaxy as it always had. The absence of humanity was rarely discussed, and when it was mentioned, it was with a dismissive wave or a comment about their predictable failure in isolation. But small things had begun to go wrong. Tai-Yang Choi stood on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching the construction drones assemble the outer ring of the colony's latest expansion. The station floated in a system that council maps had labeled as uninhabitable, but human engineers had seen potential where alien eyes had seen only obstacles. "The new agricultural section will be online in 3 weeks," his assistant reported, reviewing the construction timeline. "We're ahead of schedule." Tai-Yang nodded, a small smile crossing his face. He had been a junior engineer when humanity left council space, barely 20 years old. Now he led one of the largest human colonies in the outer territories, a sprawling network of stations and terraformed moons that supported over 2 million people. "Have we received any messages from council space?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Nothing. Complete silence, as always." That suited Tai-Yang just fine. Humanity had learned its lesson about seeking approval from those who would never grant it. Back in council space, junior analyst Cormac sat in his small office, surrounded by reports that nobody seemed interested in reading. He was young for his species, barely into his 3rd decade, and he had taken his position seriously. Perhaps too seriously, as his superiors kept reminding him. The reports all told the same story. Small system failures were occurring across council infrastructure, with increasing frequency. Medical supply stabilizers were degrading faster than expected. Agricultural yields on several worlds had dropped by 15% over the past decade. Navigation systems on long-range vessels were experiencing errors that seemed random, but were becoming more common. Cormac had done the research. He had traced the problems back to their sources. In each case, the failing systems had been maintained or enhanced by human consultants during the 2 centuries of their probationary period. The humans had never claimed credit for these improvements. They had simply done the work quietly, fixing problems and optimizing systems without fanfare. Now they were gone, and their invisible contributions were becoming obvious through their absence. He had written a detailed report titled, "The Human: Contribution and Assessment of Lost Technical Support." He had submitted it to his supervisor with confidence, certain that the council would want to know, About these issues, the report had been dismissed as irrelevant within an hour. The council is perfectly capable of managing its own infrastructure, his supervisor had said, barely glancing at the analysis. We do not need humans or anyone else to maintain our systems. Focus on more important matters. Cormix had tried to argue, but the conversation was over. He filed the report in his personal archives and returned to his assigned tasks, a knot of worry growing in his chest. Captain Daeun Lee guided her merchant vessel through the checkpoint at the edge of Council space. Her cargo hold filled with medical supplies and rare metals. She was one of the last humans who still made regular runs into Council territory, maintaining trade relationships with individual worlds rather than the Council itself. The checkpoint officer barely looked at her credentials. State your business. Delivery to Plex 4, medical supplies and construction materials. Daeun handed over the manifest, watching the officer's face carefully. Medical supplies? The officer's mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise. From human space? From my suppliers, yes. Your medical facilities on Plex 4 requested them specifically. Seems they're having trouble with supply chain issues. The officer scanned the manifest more carefully, then waved her through without further comment. As Daeun's ship moved deeper into Council space, she noted the increased security presence and the subtle signs of disrepair on the station she passed. On Plex 4, the medical director met her personally at the docking bay. He was a tall, thin alien with gray skin and too many fingers, and his relief at seeing her was obvious. Captain Lee, thank you for coming. We've been having significant problems with our supply chain. The stabilizers for our advanced medications keep failing, and the Council suppliers can't seem to fix the issue. Daeun supervised the unloading of her cargo, watching the medical staff carefully inspect each container. She had expected this. Human-designed stabilizers had been used throughout Council medical facilities for decades, but the Council had never understood the underlying technology. They had simply used what worked without asking how it worked. I can make one more run next quarter, she told the director. After that, you'll need to find alternative suppliers. I'm closing down my Council routes, the director's face fell. But Captain, we need these supplies. Our patients depend on them. Then I suggest you contact the Council and ask them to re-establish diplomatic relations with humanity. We have the knowledge and resources you need, but we won't keep providing them while being treated as inferior. Daeun's voice was firm but not unkind. You took our help for granted. Now you're learning what it costs to lose it. She left the director standing in the docking bay, staring at the crates of supplies that would run out in a few months. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of human space, Taiyang's colony continued to thrive. New technologies were being developed and tested, innovations that built upon the foundations humanity had laid during their isolation from the Council. Faster engines, more efficient power systems, advanced medical treatments that eliminated diseases the Council still struggled with. None of this information was shared with Council space. No broadcasts, no announcements, no offers of trade or cooperation. The humans had learned their lesson. They built for themselves now, sharing their knowledge only with trusted allies they had found beyond Council borders. In the Council chambers, Thexfar reviewed reports on the latest session with mild disinterest. The agricultural problems on 3 colony worlds were attributed to natural crop cycles. The medical supply issues were blamed on inefficient distribution networks. The navigation errors were written off as outdated equipment that needed replacement. Nobody mentioned the humans. Nobody suggested that their absence might be connected to these problems. The Council had operated for thousands of years before humanity arrived, and they would continue to operate just fine without them, or so they believed. Cormac sat alone in his office late into the night, adding new entries to his personal files. The pattern was clear to him even if nobody else wanted to see it. Every month brought new failures, new problems, new gaps in capability that the Council seemed unable to fill. He had tried to speak up. He had tried to make people listen. Now he simply documented everything, maintaining his records with the grim certainty that someday someone would need them. In the silence between human and Council space, the truth waited patiently to be discovered. Humanity had given more than anyone realized, and their departure had created a void that grew wider with each passing year. The Council lived in comfortable denial, but the cracks were spreading. Soon they would become too large to ignore. Admiral Hyun-woo Song stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display with calm focus. 3 raider vessels were approaching the human colony on the edge of what used to be neutral space, and they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. Distance to targets? He asked his weapons officer. 40,000 kilometers and closing. They're not even trying to hide, sir. Hyun-woo nodded. The raiders had grown bold over the past century, attacking weaker Council worlds with impunity, while the Council's military struggled with failing equipment and outdated tactics. They had probably assumed the human colony would be an easy target. Target their engines. Fire when ready. The Indomitable's weapons were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Humanity had spent the past 150 years developing their technology in isolation, free from the Council's restrictions and watchful eyes. The results were devastating. 3 precise shots. 3 disabled raider vessels tumbling through space, their crews alive but their ships crippled. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the colony. They're thanking us. The communications officer paused. And sir, there's a Council observation post in the system. They witnessed everything. Good, Hyun-woo thought. Let them see what humanity has become. 150 years after their departure, humanity was no longer the struggling species begging for acceptance. They had built a network of hundreds of thriving colonies, developed technologies that exceeded anything the Council possessed, and created a society that worked without needing anyone's approval. In Council space, things were falling apart. Councillor Thexvar was old now, his scales dull with age, his movements slow and painful. He sat in the emergency session called to address what everyone was finally admitting was a crisis. The Vryn plague has now spread to 15 worlds, the medical counselor reported, her voice heavy with grief. 3 species have been devastated. Our best estimates suggest 20 million dead in the past 6 months. What about the research teams? Another counselor demanded. Have they found a cure? They're trying, but we lack the medical infrastructure that we once had. The human consultants who used to assist with disease control are long gone, and their techniques were never properly documented. Thexvar felt a cold knot forming in his chest. The humans. Always the humans, haunting them from across the void. Counselor Miradesh, ancient and still serving on the Council after all these years, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the arguing like a blade. The humans warned us about this 20 years before they left. They provided detailed reports on potential pandemic scenarios and recommended protocols for disease containment. Those reports were filed and forgotten. The chamber fell silent. They knew. Someone asked. They knew, Miradesh confirmed, and we dismissed their concerns as alarmist. We told them to focus on their assigned duties and leave complex matters to their betters. Thexvar closed his eyes. He remembered those reports now vaguely. He had been the one to dismiss them. The crisis deepened when Warlord Krazeth's forces attacked 3 major Council colonies in a single week. The Council military responded, but their ships were old and poorly maintained. Systems that humans had once quietly serviced were failing. Weapons that humans had optimized were performing below specifications. The Council forces were routed, and Krazeth's raiders took control of valuable mining systems that the Council desperately needed. On the frontier world of New Dawn, scientist Bora Nam stood in the control center of her terraforming project, watching data streams flow across multiple displays. The dead world outside was transforming, its atmosphere slowly becoming breathable, its temperature stabilizing, its soil beginning to support plant life. How long until the surface is habitable? Her assistant asked. Another 18 months at current rates. We're actually ahead of schedule. Bora smiled, proud of her team's work. The Council used to take 2 centuries to terraform a world like this. We'll do it in 5 years. The difference was understanding. Humanity had studied the Council's terraforming techniques during their probationary period, then spent the next century improving them. The Council had possessed the knowledge but had never truly understood the science behind it. They had followed procedures without innovation, tradition without creativity. Humans had learned those procedures and then asked why and how can we make this better? The results spoke for themselves. Scout ships from Council space occasionally appeared at the borders of human territory, trying to gather information. They were always detected immediately and turned away without violence or explanation. Human border patrol ships simply escorted them back to neutral space, professionally and efficiently. The council wanted information, but humanity had nothing to say to them. Back in council chambers, Thexvar read reports that made his failing heart ache. Member species were seceding, forming their own alliances or seeking protection from other powers. The council's authority was crumbling, undermined by military weakness, economic stagnation, and the growing realization that the organization was incapable of protecting its members. "We need to contact the humans," a junior counselor suggested during one session. "They clearly have the technology and knowledge we need." "Absolutely not," Thexvar snapped, his pride still intact despite everything. "The council does not beg for help from species who abandoned us." "We did not abandon them," Miradesh said softly. "We drove them away." "There is a difference." Thexvar glared at her but said nothing. She was right and they both knew it. A delegation was sent anyway, despite Thexvar's objections. 3 ships carrying diplomats and trade representatives approached the human border, carrying messages of friendship and proposals for cooperation. They were turned back at the border. No violence, no threats, just a polite but firm message. The Terran Federation thanks the Council for their interest but declines all diplomatic contact at this time. The delegation returned to Council space humiliated and empty-handed. The message was clear. Humanity did not need the Council. They had moved beyond old grievances and old relationships. The Council was simply irrelevant to them now. Admiral Hyunwoo received reports of the failed diplomatic mission with quiet satisfaction. He had been a child when humanity left Council space, raised on stories of the dismissal and disrespect his people had endured. He bore no personal hatred toward the Council, but he felt no obligation to help them either. "Sir, should we open communications with the Council?" his first officer asked. "They're clearly struggling." "No," Hyunwoo said firmly. "They made their choice 150 years ago. They chose to see us as inferior. They chose to reject our partnership. Now they must live with those choices." On his deathbed, Thexvar finally admitted the truth to his successor, a younger counselor named Vrenta, who had not been present for humanity's dismissal. "We feared them," Thexvar whispered, his voice weak. "We saw their potential and we were afraid of what they might become if given equal status. So we kept them down, limited them, insulted them, hoping they would accept their place." Vrenta leaned closer. "And now they have become what we always feared, our superiors, and we have no one to blame but ourselves." Thexvar died that night, taking his regrets to whatever afterlife his species believed in. Vrenta inherited a council on the edge of collapse, a fractured alliance held together by tradition and little else. The silence from human space remained absolute. They had nothing to say to the Council. They had moved on, and the Council was left to face the consequences of their arrogance alone. 200 years after humanity's departure, the truth finally came to light in the most unexpected way. Subin Han moved through the crowded marketplace on Council Station Epsilon with practiced ease, her appearance altered by subtle genetic modifications that made her look like a dozen different species all at once. She was neither young nor old, neither memorable nor invisible. She was exactly what she needed to be, a ghost collecting information in plain sight. The Terran Federation Intelligence Service had sent her into Council space 6 months ago with one mission: assess whether the Council posed any threat to human interests. What she had found was far more interesting than a threat. She had found a slow-motion collapse. In her small rented room, Subin compiled her reports and sent them through encrypted channels back to Federation space. The economy was failing. Infrastructure was decaying. Medical systems were overwhelmed. The military was a shadow of its former strength. And everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of human contributions that had been taken for granted and were now desperately missed. "They never even knew we were holding things together," she murmured to herself, typing up another report. "They thought everything just worked naturally." Back in Federation space, Jinna Yoon sat in her office overlooking the gardens of Unity Station, reading Subin's reports with growing amazement. Jinna had been elected as the Philosopher Queen of the Terran Federation, a ceremonial title for what was essentially the president of humanity's loose confederation of colonies and systems. She was a direct descendant of Hyo-ri Park, the aide who had stood beside Ambassador Jae-won Kim 2 centuries ago. The story of humanity's dismissal had been passed down through her family like a sacred text. A reminder of what happened when you begged for acceptance from those who would never grant it. They're falling apart, her chief of staff said, reading over the reports. Should we offer assistance? No, Jinnah said firmly. Let them fall. When they hit bottom, perhaps then we can have an honest conversation, but not before. She understood what her ancestor had learned the hard way. Help given to those who don't value it is wasted. Assistance provided to those who see you as inferior becomes another tool for your exploitation. Dr. Ji-Hoon Kang worked in the Federation Historical Archives, a massive facility that housed every scrap of information humanity had gathered about their time with the Council. He had spent 15 years researching what he called the true history of human-council relations, and his findings were shocking even to those who thought they knew the story. Look, at this, he told his research team, pulling up documents on the main display. Medical breakthrough in nerve regeneration, developed by human research team, submitted to Council medical database with no credit given. Advanced power coupling design that increased efficiency by 30%, created by human engineers, listed in Council technical manuals as traditional design. Breakthrough in faster-than-light navigation that reduced travel time by 20%, dismissed as insignificant improvement when humans tried to publish their findings. The list went on and on. Hundreds of innovations, improvements, and breakthroughs that humanity had contributed during their 200 years of probationary status. The Council had accepted all of it, used all of it, and acknowledged none of it. They took everything and gave nothing, one of Ji-Hoon's assistants said, her voice filled with anger. Not quite, Ji-Hoon corrected. They gave us exactly what we needed. They gave us a reason to become self-sufficient. High Counselor Vrenta sat in his private office, surrounded by documents that had been buried in the archives for 2 centuries. Cormix, now an old analyst who had dedicated his entire career to documenting the human contribution, stood beside him. You were right, Vrenta said quietly, looking at the aging alien. About everything. Your reports from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, every warning you gave was accurate, Cormix nodded slowly. I take no pleasure in being right, Counselor. Show me everything. I need to know the full extent of what we've lost. For 3 days, Cormix presented his life's work. The medical systems that humans had maintained. The agricultural techniques they had improved. The infrastructure they had quietly optimized. The navigation algorithms they had enhanced. The trade protocols they had streamlined. The diplomatic connections they had carefully maintained with species outside the Council. They were the glue holding everything together, Vrenta said, his voice hollow, and we never even noticed. Because they never asked for credit, Cormix replied. They just did the work, and when we rejected them, they took their knowledge and left. Vrenta discovered something even more disturbing in the ancient records. Communications between human researchers and their Council counterparts, proposing joint research projects. Cultural exchange programs that humans had suggested, defensive alliance proposals that could have protected against the raiders who now plagued Council space. Medical research partnerships that might have prevented the Vrin plague. Every single proposal had been rejected. Every offer of genuine partnership had been dismissed as humanity overreaching beyond their station. We were offered everything, Vrenta said, barely able to process the magnitude of the Council's mistake. They wanted to be partners, not subjects. They wanted to contribute as equals, and we threw it all away because of pride and fear. In Federation space, humanity had indeed achieved everything the Council feared they would. They had cracked the problem of faster-than-light communication, something the Council had struggled with for millennia. Messages could now travel between human colonies instantaneously, creating a network of real-time coordination that made their society incredibly efficient. They had solved the energy crisis, developing power generation systems that were clean, renewable, and powerful enough to run entire worlds. Council species still relied on technologies that required rare resources and caused environmental damage. They had eliminated disease, using advanced genetic medicine and nanotechnology to cure conditions that still killed millions in Council space. The Vrin plague that devastated Council worlds would have been contained within days in human territory. And they had done all of this while maintaining complete silence toward the Council. No broadcasts, no offers of assistance, no smugness or gloating. They simply built their civilization and ignored the organization that had rejected them. Jinnah made her first public statement about the Council in 200 years, broadcast on channels that she knew Council intelligence would intercept. The galaxy is vast. The Council chose their corner of it. We chose ours. We harbor no ill will toward them, but we also have no obligation to them. They made their decision about humanity long ago. We have moved beyond that decision and built something better. The message was clear and devastating. Humanity had not just survived without the Council. They had thrived, and they felt no need to rub the Council's face in their success or seek revenge for past insults. The Council was simply irrelevant to humanity's future. Vrenta read the transcript of Jinnah's statement and felt his heart sink. It would have been easier if humanity had been angry or vengeful. Anger could be negotiated with. Vengeance could be appeased. But indifference? How do you bridge a gap with someone who simply doesn't care about you anymore? He thought about Thexfar's deathbed confession. We feared their potential, so we kept them down. Now they've become what we always feared. Our superiors. The old counselor had been wrong about one thing. The humans had not become superiors. They had become equals who simply refused to recognize the Council as relevant. That was somehow worse. Around Council space, member species were beginning to demand answers. Why had humanity been rejected? What had they offered that was refused? How much of the current crisis could have been avoided if the Council had simply treated humans as partners instead of supplicants? The questions created fractures that went beyond simple economic or military problems. They exposed fundamental flaws in how the Council operated, how it treated new species, how it maintained power through limitation rather than cooperation. The truth was spreading, and with it came the realization that the Council had made the biggest mistake in its long history. They had rejected the one species that might have saved them. Jae-Hwan Park was young for an ambassador, only 35 years old, but his name carried weight throughout the Federation. His great-great-grandmother had been Hyo-ri Park, the aide who stood beside Jae-Won Kim during humanity's final moments in the Council chambers. He had grown up hearing stories about that day, about the quiet dignity with which humanity had walked away from those who diminished them. Now he stood at the border station between Council and Federation space, waiting for visitors who had requested an audience. He was nervous, though he tried not to show it. This was unprecedented. In 250 years, no human official had met formally with Council representatives. Commander Se-Ram Lim stood beside him, her military uniform crisp and her hand never far from her weapon. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "No," Jae-Hwan admitted, "but the Council has formally dissolved its old structure. They've created something new, something that claims to be democratic. If they're sincere, we owe it to ourselves to at least listen." The Council ships appeared on schedule, 3 vessels that looked worn and outdated compared to the sleek Federation station. High Counselor Vrenta led the delegation, accompanied by Elder Miradesh and a handful of other representatives from species Jae-Hwan recognized from history texts. What shocked him most was that Miradesh was still alive. The ancient counselor had to be helped from the ship, her movements slow and painful after so many centuries. She had been present at humanity's dismissal. She had witnessed the moment that changed everything. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room, simple and functional. No grand halls or crystalline chambers, just a table, chairs, and representatives from 2 civilizations that had not spoken in 2.5 centuries. Vrenta spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "Ambassador Park, on behalf of what was once the Galactic Council and is now the Democratic Galactic Alliance, I thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I make no promises beyond listening," Jae-Hwan said carefully. "The Federation sent me because your request was made through proper diplomatic channels and because your new constitution suggests genuine change. But we have not forgotten the past, nor should you," Miradesh said, her voice thin with age but still clear. "The past is why we are here." She told them everything. How the Council had feared humanity's rapid advancement, how they had deliberately limited human participation to prevent them from gaining too much influence, how every innovation humanity offered had been accepted but never acknowledged, how the Council had convinced itself that keeping humanity subordinate was necessary for maintaining stability. "We were cowards," Miradesh said, and tears ran down her ancient face. "We saw your potential and we were afraid of what it meant for our own power. So we diminished you, insulted you, rejected you. And we told ourselves it was for the good of the galaxy. Jae-hwan listened with a mix of emotions, anger at the confirmation of what humanity had always suspected, sadness for the 2 centuries of partnership that could have been, and something else, something unexpected, pity. You traveled all this way to apologize? He asked. We came to beg, Vrenta said bluntly. The Alliance is struggling. We lack the technology, the knowledge, the expertise that humanity has developed. We need help. But more than that, we need to make this right. He pushed a data chip across the table. This contains the new Alliance Charter. Every species has equal representation. Decisions are made democratically. New members are welcomed as partners, not supplicants. Trade is free and open. Technology sharing is encouraged. We have learned from our mistakes, Ambassador. We are trying to build something better. Jae-hwan looked at the data chip but did not touch it. And what do you want from humanity? Everything, Vrenta admitted. We want to join your medical network to combat disease. We want to learn your terraforming techniques. We want to trade freely with your colonies. We want to study your technology and share our own. We want to be allies in a galaxy that grows more dangerous every year. You want what you rejected 250 years ago, Seiram said, her voice hard, after you dismissed us as primitive and inferior. After you took our innovations without credit. After you refused every offer of partnership we made. Yes? Brenta said simply. We want what we should have accepted the first time it was offered. And we know we have no right to ask for it. But we are asking anyway. Jae-hwan sat back in his chair thinking about his great-great-grandmother's stories. About Jae-won Kim's quiet dignity in the face of dismissal. About humanity's long silence as they built something better than the Council had ever been. What you're asking for is not mine to give. He said finally, I am one ambassador. The Federation is comprised of hundreds of colonies, dozens of independent systems, and billions of people. This decision requires consensus. We understand, Vrenta said, and we are prepared to wait as long as necessary. We are also prepared to accept rejection. But please allow us to make our case directly to your people. Jae-hwan considered this. I will arrange for you to present your proposal to the Federation Council. But I warn you, many of our people still remember the old wounds. Some will never forgive what was done to our ancestors. We do not ask for forgiveness, Miradesh said softly. We ask only for a chance to prove we have learned. To show that we can be the partners we should have been from the beginning. The presentations to the Federation Council took 3 weeks. Vrenta and his delegation visited human colonies, met with scientists and engineers, spoke with historians and cultural leaders. Everywhere they went, they faced questions, skepticism, and sometimes outright hostility. But they also found something unexpected. Younger humans who had not grown up with the old bitterness, scientists who were curious about Alliance research, engineers who saw potential for collaboration, people who believed that holding on to old grievances served no purpose. The debate within the Federation was intense. Some argued that humanity owed the Alliance nothing and should continue their policy of isolation. Others pointed out that the galaxy was large and dangerous, and allies were valuable even if those allies had once been blind to humanity's worth. Ye Jin-oh, the president of the Galactic Assembly that humanity had formed with their own allies, emerged as the voice of cautious reconciliation. We are not the same species that begged for acceptance, she told the Federation Council. We do not need the Alliance's approval or their recognition. But consider what we could accomplish together. Consider what we could build. The vote was close, but ultimately the Federation agreed to establish diplomatic relations with the Democratic Galactic Alliance. Not full membership, not yet, but a framework for cooperation, trade, and mutual defense. The treaty was signed aboard Unity Station with representatives from dozens of species present. It was a far cry from the crystalline chambers of the old council. This was a practical agreement between equals with no probationary periods, no limitations, no judgments about who was worthy and who was not. Jae-hwan stood with Vrenta as the documents were finalized. This does not erase the past, he said quietly. I know, Vrenta replied, but perhaps it begins to balance the ledger. Miradesh, sitting in a chair because she could no longer stand for long periods, watched the ceremony with tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry, she whispered to Jae-hwan when he approached her. I was there that day. I voted to deny your petition. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I am so sorry. Jae-hwan knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes. You came back. You admitted the truth. You helped tear down the system that committed the injustice. That matters, does it? She asked. Can it ever be enough? The new era of cooperation began slowly. Alliance medical teams learned from Federation disease control specialists, saving millions of lives. Federation engineers taught Alliance workers about advanced terraforming, opening up new worlds for colonization. Trade routes were established, bringing prosperity to both sides. There were still tensions, still moments when old wounds reopened. But there was also progress and hope, and the growing sense that something better was being built from the ashes of past mistakes. In a school on New Haven Station, human children and alien children learned together, studying the history of both civilizations with equal weight. The teacher was a young human woman who had been born long after the departure from Council Space. Remember, she told her students, our ancestors were dismissed and rejected. They could have responded with anger or violence. Instead, they responded with dignity and excellence. They built something better, and when those who rejected them finally asked for partnership, our people chose to forgive but not forget. One of the alien students raised a hand. Teacher, does that mean we should always forgive those who hurt us? The teacher smiled. It means we should make them earn it. The Alliance tore down their old system and built something new. They admitted their mistakes and worked to fix them. That's what made forgiveness possible. Not just apologies, but genuine change. Ye-jin. Oh stood at the viewport of her office, looking out at the stars. In 250 years, humanity had gone from dismissed supplicants to equals building a better galaxy. The Council had been forced to face their mistakes and transform themselves completely.